Epstein, the Clintons, and Fani Willis, they're plastered all over the news. And are they guilty? And if so, of what? Ron Chapman is a federal defense attorney. He's tried a lot of big cases. He's from Detroit, and he joins us right now on The Truth. Who's guilty and who's not? Is Epstein a spy? Or is Epstein still alive?
You know, I loved Bill Clinton's answer to that very question, right? I can't quote him specifically, but during the most recent deposition that he had, I think he said that he's just going to have to rely on what people are saying. Most people would say, "Is Epstein dead?" Yes, we saw an autopsy, we saw all sorts of stuff, but Bill Clinton hedged significantly, which kind of left open a door. Now, of course, the guy's like what is he, 86, something like that right now? I mean, I don't expect the best answers coming from a guy like that. But the reality is I think he stirred the pot on conspiracy theories related to Epstein's death significantly in that deposition.
Well, I'll tell you, I saw a YouTube video last week, and this guy was trying to find Ghislaine Maxwell. And he was walking down the street in Canada where her brother was known to live.
Yeah.
And damned if he didn't come upon a lady. And he said, "Hey, Ghislaine." And she immediately turned and looked right at him. And it was her. I'm telling you, it was her. And she was with her brother.
Yeah. Well, there's been some theories.
And I don't think it was AI generated. I mean, it could have been. I mean, that's the problem in today's world. You just don't know what to believe. And worse, you don't even know who to believe. For all I know, you're CIA and Intel.
Isn't that the real question? I mean, I'm reminded of A Few Good Men. They're looking for Markinson, and Tom Cruise goes, "Are you Markinson?" "I'm not Markinson." And he says, "There's two down." I mean, that's exactly it, right? We have no idea who's who or what's what anymore. But here's the reality with Ghislaine Maxwell. That she's the daughter of Bob Maxwell, very suspicious circumstances. Definitely Bob Maxwell has ties to Mossad, if not is Mossad, and he had a suspicious death.
Nobody denies that. I haven't heard one person that says that he wouldn't in Mossad.
And he just takes his boat out one day and mysteriously just falls off the boat, right? And this was right around the time that his entire publishing empire was crumbling. One of the things that we know about these types of people is that when they start to face this type of scrutiny, they just sort of disappear. Bob Maxwell, empire was crumbling. He's gone. Jeffrey Epstein, scrutiny. He's gone. Vince Foster, go back to the Clintons in the White House, mysterious suicide that occurred in some random park in Washington, D.C. I got an episode on it that's got a lot of views.
Well, the timeline doesn't work either. I mean, I don't remember the particulars, but a great read for anyone interested is Roger Stone's The Clinton Women, I believe is the name of it.
Yeah.
And he chronicles a lot of the sketchiness that surrounded Clinton.
Yeah. I mean, the question here would be, is there death or is there just disappearance? Like, that's a possible outcome as well, right? You've got a guy like Vince Foster who disappears in a park, and then at that same time, Hillary Clinton has her people go back into his office to grab some of the documents that would have been very important for the Whitewater investigation. It was convenient that Vince Foster couldn't undergo questioning. But here's something that, and I don't mean to get too off on a Clinton tangent, but speaking of those depositions that were taken, here's something that's just absolutely amazing to me, is how played the GOP got. And I started looking into that, right? You see these depositions of the Clintons, and you see the questioning that was done of them was limited mostly to Jeffrey Epstein and his nefarious activities, but nobody was really allowed to go into Clinton Foundation, donations. Dershowitz's claim that Jeffrey Epstein created the Clinton Foundation. And why? Well, it seems to me that Kash Patel is working up a pretty significant investigation with Pam Bondi related to the Clinton Foundation. And a lot of the information that was held back from the Epstein files is related to that investigation. And the last thing you want is Comer and these two terrible non-lawyers that were doing the deposition questioning. The last thing that you want from them is for them to come out and say, or ask questions about the thing that you're trying to investigate, right? One thing in federal law that we all do is when there's a federal investigation, nobody wants to go on the record and talk about it because that destroys your investigation, witnesses, testimony changes and all that. So, a lot of people are probably going to be disappointed seeing those depositions, realizing there were no good questions asked. I think it's by design, and it tells me exactly what's going on. The Clintons are under federal investigation for their Clinton Foundation activities, as well as Russiagate in addition.
You think they are under investigation?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's not even a secret, right?
Even though, I noticed the most telling part of Clinton's deposition for me, or one of the most telling parts, was that when they asked about Donald Trump, he exonerated them. And I looked at that. I mean, he went out of his way to say that Donald Trump had no untoward dealings with Epstein.
Well, yeah.
And I was just like, oh, you're sucking up. I can see through that.
Exactly. I did a look at Hillary Clinton's random nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize towards Donald Trump, and I found that quite curious. So I started looking into it, and absolutely, right? I mean, you've got the Clintons in your sights. You've got Doge, who's already just wreaked havoc over some of the information that the Clintons have wanted to keep private about nonprofit donations for years. They've got all of the evidence. And what do you do when you're the Clintons? You got to suck up a little bit. I mean, and that's exactly what Trump would allow. He doesn't want the view of prosecuting his former political opponent. Nobody wants that, right? And nobody's going to convict Hillary Clinton, right? So what do? You just bend her and you make her support him, and he keeps his reign, and he gets Vance into office pretty easily. And that's the play. That's exactly what I would do.
Okay, Ron, well, let's switch gears just for a second. And let me ask you, why do you believe that Fani Willis is still a member of the Georgia bar?
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy to me, right? I mean, what we've seen here, even just with Nathan Wade, was incredibly egregious. The use of taxpayer dollars in order to engage in this sort of investigation against Donald Trump was terrible. Campaigning on that fact, terrible alone. But then you've got a situation where she's basically had her covert lover engaged in the prosecution as well. I think they both thought that they were going to be famous off of this, and they were notorious, I guess.
Well, they are. They're
right?
More infamous.
Yeah. But the odor of mendacity is the greatest line from that judicial decision that I could ever read. And then here's where it gets even worse. You've got Wade and Willis making so many trips to Washington around this time, and when you ask them about those expenses, they have absolutely no recollection of what any of those meetings were about. I think you and I know exactly what was going on with those trips to Washington.
Well, we've since learned, because we've got document dumps, FOIA responses that show that they were absolutely in coordination with the White House and the Department of Justice. So I don't think we have to guess anymore. Yeah. But I don't. Where are the feds? I mean, why aren't they there peeling apart Fani's bank records and Nathan Wade's bank records? Yeah. And seeing whether Fani really did reimburse Nathan Wade in cash, as she rather disingenuously claimed.
Sometimes the best way to go at your target is not through the political avenue, but it's the unimpeachable one that will garner a lot of public support. And that's exactly what's happening with Fani Willis right now. So in addition, when you're nefarious like this with Donald Trump, there's other things that you're doing wrong. And we can see that with Fani Willis. It's been reported that she's engaged in some cash kickback schemes related to forfeitures, which the people of Atlanta would not like very much. When you're Donald Trump and you want to think about having Pam Bondi prosecute somebody like Fani Willis, do you want to do that when you really need the votes in Georgia and people who voted for her are likely going to hate you? Or do you want to do that in a way that actually shows those people that voted for her that they were defrauded? And that's exactly what he's doing. So he's taking an end run around this political issue, and he's currently investigating, and Congress is also investigating, the operation of that office and the expenditure of taxpayer dollars by other means, including causing people to have to forfeit their property, selling that property, and use it to fund some of these operations, like the prosecution of Donald Trump and prosecutions of other individuals, politically motivated prosecutions. You're going to see indictments handed down related to just that. And I think they're probably going to want to have that happen around midterm or right around the next presidential election.
Did you feel like Or did you sense that Judge McAfee did he show bias towards Fani Willis, his former boss in the district attorney's office?
I want to say yes, I really do. But one of the things that I would say is he showed deference, right? Deference can look like bias very quickly. So in many of the opinions that I read, he was sort of avoiding jumping to conclusions. He was forcing evidence, but he allowed the procedure to take place that ultimately resulted in the dismissal of the indictment against Donald Trump. And I think for that, you have to say, it wasn't overt bias, right? But it was deference to Fani Willis and her decisions until people went through the hard work to show it.
Well, that's a good point.
You know, at the end of the day, yeah, she was his boss.
And he did do on the big substantive issue, he did what we wanted him to do. But the way that he treated Fani Willis in the courtroom and allowed her really to just completely take over and dominate in his courtroom, and then to write an opinion that says there's an air of mendacity. I mean, why did he just not say, look, you're conflicted. You've taken money from the taxpayers and given it to your lover and then benefited by going on exotic travel around the globe. Yeah. I mean, come on, give me a break. Yeah. Leading me to, again, rhetorically ask, why is she still a member of the bar? I mean, she should be kicked out. I mean, I think that, you've got more than enough circumstantial evidence to convict somebody of murder. Clearly, enough to convict someone of corruption. I mean, I think the pieces of the puzzle are there right in front of us. $750,000 paid to Nathan Wade, really, for his RICO expertise? Oh, yeah. But he never tried a RICO case. I forgot.
Yep. Yeah. I agree with you. But to get the Georgia bar to take her license away requires what amounts to a democratic decision from people who still support Fani Willis and think that she was doing the right thing. I think if you want to take it away, you're just going to have a prosecution of her and an ultimate conviction. And that's going to be something that has to happen in federal court. It certainly can't happen in
I was going to say it's time for the feds to show up.
Exactly.
I think it highlights another kind of recurring theme that we talk about, and that is that in 2026, there just doesn't seem to be much accountability for people who serve in government. It's like you get a free pass. You can steal. I mean, look at the Ilhan Omar going from a negative net worth just months ago to 25 million today. Really?
Yeah. It's shocking. I mean, it shows that there's been a power circle around this type of nonprofit fraud, which you're going to see a lot more of. That's been generated. And ironically, that's the interest in the Epstein files that people should really be talking about, is the fact that he was the founder of this idea that you funnel a lot of money. He was trying to do it with Bill Gates, funnel a lot of money into nonprofit to secure your seat of power, and then use that to get your other friends in power. That's what we see with Omar. But the real problem.
And then they own you.
Yeah,
as a consequence.
Exactly. I mean, this is just like kind of the Russian tactics as well. You get them compromised, and then they've got to do you favors. But here's I think the more important thing about this, and this is the thing that matters to all Americans, it is now impossible to sue your federal government for just about anything, right? There was a case decided by the Supreme Court, Bivens, a long time ago, which opened up an avenue for you to file a lawsuit against the government alleging a constitutional violation. Well, that door was effectively closed, I think 2 or 3 terms ago, by this Smugglers In case, which is a very interesting read if you take a second to read about it. But essentially, this guy was just basically harassed by a federal agent repeatedly, and ultimately resulting in injury and detention and a whole violation of his civil rights. And the Supreme Court just continued to close the door on any relief, which means that average citizens, if you want to file a lawsuit against your government, if you want to go after Omar and say, you deprived me of the benefit of my tax dollars, you have no standing to do so. And until that's changed, there will always be 2 sources of power. That will be the people, and we are quieted by the fact that we can't sue. And then there will be the powerful elites in government that can do whatever the hell they want without any recourse. And that creates a lot of problems for what we call a republic or a democracy.
I mean, things have really changed since the time that I entered law school. Way back then, We generally had the perception that the Supreme Court had a liberal bias and that they bent over backwards to protect the bad guys. Hence the Miranda warnings and other notable cases that came out of the 60s and 70s. Seems now that they've just gone completely right wing in terms of criminal defense, and that you don't have much chance when you're up against the federal government. I'm curious to know what your experience is. I mean, we read that 98% of all federal prosecutions result in conviction.
Yeah. Well, this is because the liberals on the court aren't doing their job well enough, right? I support balance on the Supreme Court. I think that if you go completely right, you got problems. If you go completely left, you got problems. And what we need is balance, with somebody like Roberts in the middle calling balls and strikes. But instead, what we have is liberals playing this confusing game with jurisprudence, and the right continuing to do what the right does, which causes a tremendous imbalance. It used to be that the liberals would look out for the least of us, right? They would spend some time with their jurisprudence saying, hey, we don't want that encroachment on civil rights, or we see these types of cases post civil rights movement where they were protecting the civil rights of individuals. Well, now they're so confused with wokeness that they don't even know how to protect civil rights anymore. And so that's been left to people, thankfully, like Gorsuch, who can at least protect it from an expansive government standpoint. Let's not let the government get big enough. But that doesn't go far enough, right? We still need somebody looking out for that average criminal defendant to make sure you get a fair trial. And now, I mean, I just had 100 pages of conspiracy instructions that were read to a jury. And the reality is that if any average American who's a non-lawyer can figure those instructions out, I would be surprised. As the world gets more confusing, justice starts to slip. Carl Sagan told this to us years ago. But right now, federal law, federal jurisprudence, federal regulations are so confusing, the average American can't figure it out. And when they can't figure it out, they just go government. They say, something must have been wrong here. I'm not sure what it is. We'll convict.
Yeah. As a culture, we seem to give a disproportionate credibility to government, and it's just convenient. Well, the government says so it must be true.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's been an absolutely disproportionate amount, without the ability to sue the government, without the ability to effectively, get access to courts. If you want to try to take care of a conviction post-trial, the procedural hurdles that you have right now make it almost impossible for even a talented lawyer to navigate that space. So we need a rebalancing. Right. I mean, there's the geopolitical fight going on with Iran and Venezuela and oil that we could talk about. But one of the things that we need to address, and that I stand for, is rebalancing the government so that the people can actually have a seat at the table again. And I'm really not seeing the Trump administration addressing that. And I hope to see that soon. That's where we have to go next for all of us.
Well, I kind of always subscribe to the quote that better to let 100 guilty people go free than to convict one innocent person. Who said that, by the way?
I have no idea who said it, but I love that quote. I should probably look that up at some point.
It may have been Ben Franklin. I don't know. Anthony, Google that for us, will you?
People always ask me.
Ask Grok. They'll know.
I like it.
One place that I think we might have a chance of getting accountability, John Brennan, the former head of the Central Intelligence Agency, is before a grand jury in the Southern District of Miami as we speak. Do you have any insights or any knowledge about where that stands, and what do your instincts tell you?
That's difficult, but I can look into the jurisdiction and give you a few assumptions, or probably good guesses as to why, and also Brennan's activities. Right? I mean, we all know that there's this prosecution related to the book that he wrote, and one of the things that I talked about widely on my podcast was the fact that he developed these notes. He took them outside. Purportedly wrote a book. This was similar to what Petraeus was alleged to have done. But I think what he was also doing was emailing them to family members. And that was quite shocking, because nobody's going to really implicate their family in this sort of deviation from what you should do with intelligence documents, with top secret material. I reckon, this is a guess, that those family members weren't really family members. that the family members were people who wanted to get the secrets of the United States. And one of the reasons why this has been relatively kept under wraps is because this is a national security case where Brennan may be under fire for spilling secrets to people that weren't just his family, but maybe were more important. Now, we look at a grand jury happening in Florida and we think a few things here. Number one, it's a more favorable jurisdiction. Prosecuting Brennan in or around Washington or Virginia is damn near impossible,
Sure.
right?
Well, we've seen that in real time.
Yeah. So what you need to do is find a place where he has committed a federal crime and under federal jurisdiction, and then find venue there. Now, thankfully, and my clients are all victims of this, the venue laws in the United States are so broad that you could almost prosecute anybody anywhere. All you need to do is find some hook to some activity that occurred in Florida, and now you've got a more favorable jurisdiction to try that case. So what I imagine is that he sent some communication while he was down there. He did something in that jurisdiction that amounted to this type of security violation we're concerned with. And what they're doing is proceeding under a larger prosecution down in that jurisdiction. People will whine about the venue, but the reality is goose gander, right? I mean, they trapped Donald Trump in courtrooms across the country because of these venue issues. And Brennan's just going to be brought to Florida. And I will tell you that the result of this and the continuous divide politically of the courts will get us a lot closer to a fracturing of the country than we really want to be. So hopefully we can at some point stop the games, and a guy like Brennan, who should be prosecuted, should be able to be prosecuted in Washington, D.C., where that case arose. But it's going to take a clean sweep of those in power in Washington, D.C. for that to actually happen.
I believe strongly, based on what I know, that the 2020 election was in fact stolen. And we know that Clapper and Brennan and Comey, in collaboration with Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Perkins Coie, engineered, fabricated, made up the Russia Steele dossier.
Absolutely.
And they did, and then they came out, the 52 intelligence officers said that Hunter Biden's laptop smacked of Russia disinformation, just a bunch of garbage. And they knew that that was a lie. And I think all that stuff combined did cost President Trump his second term in 2020. And frankly, as mad as I was about it, in retrospect, and I said on this program, for the 4 years we endured the illegitimate presidency of Joe Biden, that it could be a blessing. And I think it has turned out to be a blessing. Donald Trump had 4 years to stew over it and think about it and strategize and plan his second term. And I think it is enabling him to be far more effective now than he would have been in 2020, because he started with a clean slate. He knew who not to go to in round two, and he had plenty of time to reflect on it. So philosophically, and I said on the show, I believe that God is in charge, and I think God had a plan, and I think that Donald Trump is divine. I think that it is part of God's plan, and it is working out beautifully. And I also think that Donald Trump is still mad about 2020. Mm-hmm. And I think he's really upset about having almost been killed in Butler, Pennsylvania, which to me has fingerprints of intelligence written all over it. They did everything they could to stop him, literally everything they could, and they failed. Yeah. And now I think it's their turn in the barrel. Now, as a member of the media, do I have any opportunity to go down to Miami and peek behind the curtain to talk to members of the grand jury? There's a wall of silence, I know. Yep. Is there anything that boots on shoe leather on the ground in Miami could produce at this point?
No, unfortunately.
Because if you tell me there is, I'll be there tomorrow.
Yeah, and I'll be your correspondent. I'm happy to go down there and film from the courthouse. But unfortunately, you're not going to be able to see that. Grand jury members are sworn to secrecy. They take an oath. They're not allowed to talk about what happens there. The prosecutors aren't. Everything that is filed is under seal. The only way that you can glean information from a grand jury is finding out who was subpoenaed. because when a subpoena is issued, that doesn't necessarily have to be kept under wraps, and sometimes that becomes public knowledge. I want to take a second to go back to your comments, though, on 2020 and Trump. And one of the most amazing things that we see here is that a guy like Trump is able to turn this country around, given the tools that he has available to him right now, principally because he was able to get a lot of popular support because the Democrats did what they did. So he's very much fueled by those activities, right? And the reality is that power corrupts. And you had Joe Biden come into power, you had Barack Obama come into power, and ultimately it corrupted them, and they wanted to stay in power. So what did they do? They engaged in a bunch of nefarious tactics. But with respect to the election, I haven't put this episode out yet, but it's something that I've been researching, and I give you some of it right now. I was in Detroit during that election. COVID is happening. I'm locked down literally in the city of Detroit. My polling location was in Detroit. I walked in. I'm the kind of guy who likes to walk into the polls and actually physically vote, which I hope we can get back to at some point in this country. And I cast my ballot. Well, the place was empty. Absolutely empty, right? Nobody was there. I talked to the lady who was there at the polling location. She says it's been the slowest election she's ever seen. She'd been doing election for 34 years, right? I jump on the news coverage. Slow day. They're outside the courthouse. They're outside the polling locations. Nothing's really happening. But then I start to see the vote tallies come in, right? And then, of course, the TCF Center, they close down the place and put boards over the walls, and then they kick out the Republican inspectors. And then you start seeing these machines carted in. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist.
They did that in Michigan, you're saying?
In Detroit, Michigan. Yeah, absolutely. And then you start...
Wow, same thing they did in Georgia. I did not know that.
Yep.
They claimed there was a water main break in the State Farm Arena, and it turned out to be nothing but a lie. There had been a toilet that leaked at 6 o'clock that morning that had long since been stopped.
Yeah.
But they used that as the reason to kick out all the observers in the media.
That's exactly.
I did not know that the same thing happened in Detroit.
Oh, yeah, it's common.
Amazing.
And of course, you had a search warrant executed down there in Georgia, and they're getting to the bottom of some of this failure to keep records because they're investigating it. And they're also going to start looking into Detroit, too. And the statute of limitations hasn't run. This is a conspiracy that's gone on for quite a while. But then I look at the news at night, and I start to see the vote tallies. And then if you look at the excess vote numbers for the number of people that voted during COVID-19, it is absolutely insane and statistically impossible for these votes to have come out this way.
More ballots were cast than voters existed. Yeah. That's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we've got 4 solid citizens who were poll workers, some of them, a couple of them volunteers, a couple of them actually employed as poll workers, who independently testified that they saw a pallet full of pristine absentee ballots all scored for Biden, waiting to be tabulated in the State Farm Arena. Yeah. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. 3,800 duplicate ballots on the Secretary of State's own website. We could see the people operating the tabulators. They didn't know they were on camera. It turned out that the guy who installed the security system in the State Farm Arena said, I think I'll just go look at the video from the security cameras. And lo and behold, there they are on camera taking the same stack of 100 ballots and putting them back through the tabulator. One lady did it 32 times. That's 3,200 votes. And those are the ones that probably we can't necessarily detect.
Yep.
The 3,800 that are visible. The lawyer that I supported in that case had 20 interns go through all the ballot images on the SOS's website, and they were able to identify 3,800 that anybody with 2 eyes, a brain, and a conscience would say that's the same ballot.
Yeah. Perfectly filled out.
And so we haven't even identified the ones that lack some unique stray mark that would identify it as being the same ballot. Yeah. So the amount of fraud was consequential, and it's really inestimable.
Yeah.
We estimated originally that there were 40,000 illegal votes in Fulton County. We have subsequently learned that there were 170 ballot tapes that were not signed and certified according to state law, yet Brad Raffensperger took those ballot tapes and certified them as part of certifying the election, representing 320,000 ballots that were illegally counted or certified. So I just don't know who was capable of pulling that off and covering it up. It to me, the only answer intellectually I can come up with is the intelligence community of our country. And I do think it was a coup, and I do think it was orchestrated, and I do think it's been covered up. And you just look at the way that they've covered it up, giving Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss a $40 million judgment in a defamation case against Rudy Giuliani. I mean, I don't know how the jury could conclude that those damages were applicable or fair, given the fact that they probably are making, a very low income. And I don't know that that income has been disrupted. I think they still are working. I don't have personal knowledge one way or the other. But I mean, it's just crazy. And what it was, and the Dominion lawsuit against Fox for $1 billion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not based on substance. It's based on chilling free speech and getting to the bottom of what happened.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think you'd have to be, pretty dumb not to see that. So I do hope that Trump will get to the bottom of it. And I am hopeful that the grand jury is working in Miami and that they will come up with solid evidence to unmask John Brennan, Clapper, Comey, and the rest of the thugs that have worked really hard to undermine our democracy.
Yeah, the most telling thing for me in the Fulton County search warrant was the appearance of Tulsi Gabbard, right? Tulsi Gabbard, obviously,
Me too.
Formerly a Democrat, and she's running the DNI investigation. And when you look into her role, and I did an episode about this as well in a little bit more detail, but when you look into her role in this investigation, what she's doing is investigating from an intelligence standpoint. She has no criminal investigative authority, but matters of national interest are able to be investigated. She won't have any power to investigate people domestically, but she does have the ability to investigate foreign intrusions into our election that go into domestic issues. And so what does that tell you? Well, we start to see Minnesota popping off, and we saw a lot of money. I can't remember this guy's name, but that Chinese financier who's really blowing up social media with the Hamas protests and all that. He's dumping money into Minnesota. He was already doing the same thing into Fulton County. And we start to see that there may be some international connections and foreign influence that's involved here. Now, does that mean that the Obama and Biden administration were compromised by Chinese influences? I don't know that I would go that far, but the presence of Tulsi Gabbard.
Well, you surely can draw that inference with Biden. He took $3 million from a Chinese company with direct ties to the CCP.
Yeah, and then of course,
Jiminy Christmas, how much more do you need to know? Meanwhile, spy balloons are hovering over our most sensitive military bases in this country. I mean, come on, people, wake up. Get real.
Gabbard's going to blow the lid off of it. And maybe that doesn't result in a prosecution of anybody, but maybe that results in a report with information to the American people so that we can understand just how deep foreign influence was into that whole stealing of our country that was almost completely executed, but only saved by the fact that Donald Trump was able to win an election. At least we had some counterbalance to what was going on.
So tell me again about kicking the observers out in Detroit. I want to get into the weeds on that one. Because I had not heard that before, and I've been pretty attuned to this whole thing.
I spent some time for this episode going back into the news coverage that was occurring back then, because the local news wasn't being censored as much as the national news. And I was actually down near the TCF Center that night, so I was able to see firsthand what was happening. This was when I was just a lawyer. Now I have a bit more of a media presence, so I can talk about it. But what you saw was a boarded up area that was supposed to be for observers, where they actually put boards up and paper up over the windows so that people couldn't see what was happening at night at the TCF Center. You also saw a number of Republican observers, conservative observers, that were removed from the place under this idea that they were somehow disruptive, right? And then in addition, somebody was able to get a hold of, and there's a court case about this, was able to get a hold of an election one of those ballot counting machines, and they were actually sued, and there was even a criminal prosecution related to that. And I think there were several attorneys who were disbarred when they were trying to interrogate the actual voting machine in Michigan to be able to determine whether or not it was properly tabulating votes. But when push comes to shove, what you had in Detroit, this goes back to Acorn during the Obama administration, right? A rush to sign people up to vote, then to change the law to allow mail-in ballots. And when that didn't work, COVID came to the rescue, right? So then you could create an emergency exception. And we started to see emergency exceptions all over the land, allowing mail-in ballots. And then, and this happened in Georgia, Fulton County as well, everybody who'd signed up to vote, everybody who'd registered, regardless of whether or not their registration was 5 years old or what, was sent a ballot in some cases. And I had
my wife and I got them. We got absentee ballots. I didn't ask for an absentee ballot. It showed up in our mailbox. That just shows you, to validate your point.
When my episode aired, there were people reporting back to me that they received 4 or 5 ballots from prior registrations at old addresses. Absolutely crazy.
Well, and you had so much anecdotal information of people showing up to the polls to vote and being told, "No, sorry, you've already voted." And they said, "No, I haven't voted." And they said, "Yeah, you did by absentee ballot." So the evidence abounded. And what you're describing about the person that was sued for tampering with the tabulator is identical to what happened in Coffee County, Georgia, when the the elections official took a copy of the hard drive from one of the Dominion machines and copied it. I think that's what transpired. And so Brad Raffensperger sends people in uniform down there with handcuffs and guns and threatened to arrest her for having done that. And then Tina Peters is it Colorado, that has been put in jail.
That's right.
Because of her work in trying to get to the bottom of what happened. I mean, that's why I say that when Biden, the illegitimate 46th president of the United States, for those 4 years, I really do believe that we were on the verge of losing our country. And I just pray and thank God every night that he did not allow Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who we now see is at least a sponsor, enabler of corruption, if not actually corrupt himself. I'm waiting for that shoe to drop. But that gets me to my final point, and that is, why the hell do we keep talking about Biden's mental acuity? I mean, okay, it's real. That's a legitimate point of interest. But why are we not talking about the millions upon millions upon millions of dollars that he took under the table? Hunter Biden, $3 million from the mayor of Moscow, a Porsche and diamonds from a Russian oligarch, $3 million from the company that we referenced in China. I mean, where is the damn accountability? And is it part of the way that we compensate leaders in our country? We pay them a paltry sum, frankly. I mean, it's laughable to think that Donald Trump's going to work for, I think, $400,000 a year, maybe $425,000. But I just wonder if, and Trump, who I love, he's cashing in on the presidency too. Don't kid yourself. Hell, you can go online right now and buy a Trump watch. I mean, he should hire Mike Lindell to do the advertising for the Trump watch, because Lindell's a much better advertiser than Trump is for his watch. I mean, I love Trump's policies, but some of the things that he does, I'm just like, dude, seriously, can you just self-regulate a little bit? And going on infomercials pushing the Trump watch, to me, denigrates the office of the presidency of the United States. I mean, please. But he doesn't need the money. Okay, but it doesn't stop him from doing it. And it bothers me, in case you couldn't tell.
There's nothing wrong with making a little bit of money because you have public office, right? That's been allowed forever. But where the problem comes into play is when you use your influence to benefit somebody illegally in order to make that money, right? And if you take it under the table, the Trump watch being advertised publicly, Trump Force Ones.
It's notorious.
It's out in the open. Trump hotels, Trump Force Ones, all of that stuff, it's out in the open. It's no secret. But when you cut a deal.
I totally agree with you. I'm making a legal argument for Biden, and I'm making a what do you call it? A decorum argument with respect to Trump.
Once upon a time, I was a Marine Corps prosecutor, and one of my jobs was to write ethics opinions about whether or not people could take money, because then you've got the prosecutor saying you can or you cannot. I had 4-star generals coming to me asking an opinion as to whether or not some defense contractor might be able to buy donuts for a meeting in the morning, right? And I had to write a lengthy opinion to a 4-star general about that. Where is that in government, right? Where is that actually happening with people like Joe Biden? If there's any deal between his son and Burisma, that's got to be disclosed, and it needs to be the subject of a legal opinion if there's ever going to be anything like that.
And you got that one guy who came out and said that he was personally in the room when Hunter Biden said 10% for the big guy.
Yep.
And there wasn't any confusion about who the big guy was.
Yeah.
Well, keep doing what you're doing. I very much appreciate your efforts on behalf of our nation. And, that is the one thing that has changed. I've been a big conspiracy buff on the Kennedy assassination, not because I relish conspiracies, I relish the truth. And so I've followed it, I've read, I've studied. And today, I think that the majority of people realize that our own government killed President Kennedy. But it took us 65 years to get there. Today, thanks to the internet and people like you and me and Tucker and Megan and Candace and all the others, information is flowing so much faster, and we have so much more access to real-time, valid information. And I think that might be the silver bullet to getting our country back on track. But the American people have got to stand up and stop and say, stop, no more, not on our watch.
Right.
That's the next thing that's the next phase that we need to enter.
That's absolutely right. I agree with you 100%. Don't know much about the Kennedy assassination, but what I will tell you is, conspiracy theory or not, what we all need to be interested in is the truth and testing the truth, right, as much as possible.
If you would like a graduate course look into the Kennedy assassination, I would love to come onto your podcast and have that conversation. I was home from school with the flu when he was killed. I watched the events unfold on our black and white television in our family room in my house in Macon, Georgia, for 4 days. And I developed a very unhealthy obsession with what happened. And I've never shook it. I've been to Dealey Plaza multiple times. I've retraced Kennedy steps, Oswald steps, visited where Jack Ruby's bar used to be. It's no longer there. And I've read every book and watched every video. And really, the unsung hero in all of this is really Oliver Stone. He laid it all out for us in the 70s, and he should get a Medal of Honor, because he did it when it was perilous. And why they allowed him to live, I don't know. But everything that he put forth in that movie, which he labeled as fiction, has turned out to be validated and true. So if you want to know about the Kennedy assassination, just go watch the Oliver Stone movie.
I'll watch it, and I'd love to have you on at some point. We'll be ready to cover it.
Thank you so much, Ron Chapman, of a federal defense lawyer, tries cases in federal court in Detroit. He's sitting in the courtroom right now in a little side office while he's waiting for the judge to call him back into court. It's been a pleasure, Ron. Thank you, and come back soon. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Oh, thank you. You too.